3 days before the wedding, I found myself standing in the middle of a flower shop, silently arguing with my mother about the difference between dusty rose and blush. According to her, the florist had clearly mixed them up. According to me, it didn't matter. But in the universe of Margot Taylor, mother of the bride and part-time perfectionist, everything mattered. "It's your big day, Sophie," she reminded me with the kind of tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. "It should be perfect." I nodded, even though I'd stopped believing in perfect a long time ago. My name is Sophie Taylor, soon to be Sophie Lang, and I was 29 days away from marrying the kindest man I'd ever met. Daniel had proposed last spring during a rainy hike, slipping a ring on my muddy hand while grinning like a lovesick fool. I'd said yes before he finished the question. And yet, between the final dress fittings, the seating chart wars, and the emotional landmines of family traditions, something about these last few weeks had started to feel off. Richard, the man I'd called Dad my entire life, had been quiet lately. Not cold exactly, just absent, distracted during tastings, late to fittings. He'd missed my final dress appointment entirely, claiming a last-minute work call. "You know how he gets," Mom had said, dismissing it with a wave of her manicured hand. "He's just not a sentimental man." But I'd always hoped deep down that something might shift during the wedding, that maybe walking me down the aisle would crack open something tender in him, something real. Instead, he seemed more and more like a reluctant actor playing the role of father of the bride. I tried not to let it ruin the mood. I told myself families were messy, especially around weddings. I had Daniel. I had my best friends. I had a career I loved and a Pinterest board full of centerpieces. That should have been enough. But the smallest things, Richard's lingering silence, the clipped way my mother avoided certain topics, felt like whispers under the noise, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being left unsaid. I just didn't know what yet. It happened while I was hunting for baby pictures. We were putting together a slideshow for the reception. Daniel thought it would be sweet to show a photo timeline of us growing up, ending with one of us together in front of the house we just bought. I was in the attic digging through one of the old plastic bins my mom had labeled Sophie Elementary. Amid the macaroni art and outdated school portraits, I found a faded envelope tucked between 2 photo albums. Inside was a single photograph. It wasn't labeled, just a grainy print of my mother, 20-something and smiling like someone caught off guard. Her hand rested gently on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a U2 t-shirt and aviators. He wasn't posing. He was looking at her. The date scrawled in blue ink on the back stopped me cold. June 1994. I was born in March 1995. When I brought the photo downstairs, Mom barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's no one. Just a friend from college," she said, reaching for it too quickly. "Did I ever meet him?" "Number," he moved away. "Why are you even looking through that box? I thought I told you your baby photos were in the yellow bin." Her voice was casual, but her tone had a sharp edge, like the conversation was a door she was prepared to slam shut if I pushed even an inch further. I nodded and slid the photo back into the envelope, though something in my chest was beginning to coil tight. I'd known most of my mom's college friends over the years, at least by name or story. But this man was unfamiliar. Not one reference, not one photo, not even a nickname. And the look on his face in that photo, it wasn't friendly. It was intimate, familiar, like he knew her in a way that went deeper than casual. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to the quiet hum of our apartment and wondering why my mom would lie about a photo, why she looked more like herself in that single image than in any I'd ever seen, and why Richard, the man who raised me, had never once mentioned him. Something wasn't adding up, and I was finally starting to notice. Aunt Linda arrived a day early, unannounced but not entirely unwelcome. She showed up at my apartment with a battered suitcase, a bottle of decent wine, and a look that suggested she hadn't slept well in years. I figured you'd need reinforcements, she said, brushing past me like we'd just spoken last week instead of 3 years ago. She was my mother's older sister, estranged depending on who you asked. Growing up, she'd been the fun aunt who sent sparkly cards and offbeat birthday gifts. But somewhere around my 20s, she and my mother had fallen out hard. Mom said Linda was dramatic. Linda called my mother controlling. Neither denied it. Still, there was something comforting about having her there. Someone who didn't flinch at the idea of messy family dynamics. That evening, as we sat on my tiny balcony with glasses of wine and the city lights stretching below us, Linda watched me for a long moment before saying, "You look just like her, you know, back then, before everything changed." I smiled politely. "Thanks, I think." She exhaled, twisting her glass between her fingers. "If your mother had just told the truth back then..." My stomach dipped. Told the truth about what? Linda blinked, realizing her slip, then forced a laugh that didn't quite land. "Oh, you know how your mom is. Everything's a secret, even what kind of mascara she wears." I didn't laugh. "Linda," I said slowly, "is there something I should know?" She took another sip and looked away. No. Forget I said anything. It's your wedding week. No ghosts allowed." But the words stuck with me long after she went to bed. If your mother had just told the truth, it wasn't nothing, and it didn't feel like a joke. In the background of dress fittings and final vendor calls, a hum of unease began to grow louder, and I was no longer sure I wanted it to quiet down. The rehearsal dinner was held in a dimly lit private room at Daniel's favorite restaurant, one of those rustic chic places with mismatched chairs, exposed brick, and overpriced cocktails that look like science experiments. Everything had been planned down to the minute, of course. My mother had a tight schedule. Daniel had memorized it. I just wanted to get through the evening without someone crying over the creme brulee. Linda showed up 10 minutes late wearing a black silk blouse and an expression that dared someone to say something. My mother's mouth tightened immediately. Their hug was more of a shoulder tap. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Daniel's parents told the story of how he once tried to propose in a canoe. Everyone laughed, but beneath the surface, something was crackling, and I could feel it building. By the time the wine hit the table, Linda was leaning a little too heavily into her second glass. I noticed her eyes dart to me whenever someone brought up childhood stories or my parents' early days. At one point, she raised her glass mid-toast and said, "To Sophie, proof that the past always catches up to you eventually." The room went silent for a beat too long. "What's that supposed to mean?" my mother asked, voice tight. Linda blinked slowly. "Just that she's a reflection of all that came before. Genetics are funny like that." My mother smiled the way people do when they're trying not to scream. "That's enough wine for you." Richard, who had barely spoken all evening, suddenly stood and said he needed to take a call. He didn't come back for 20 minutes. When I found him outside, he was staring out at the parking lot like he wasn't sure where he was. "Just getting some air," he said, without looking at me. "Everything okay?" He hesitated. "Yeah, big day tomorrow." I nodded, though the air between us felt heavier than it should have. When we went back inside, Linda was gone, her half-eaten dessert still sitting at the table. My mother acted like she hadn't noticed, but I noticed. The glances, the words left unsaid, the look on Richard's face when I asked a simple question. Whatever this was, it wasn't just wedding stress. Something was unraveling, and I was finally starting to pull the thread. I found the envelope after everyone had gone to bed. It was tucked beneath my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, cream-colored and slightly creased, with my name written in slanted cursive I recognized immediately as Linda's. No explanation, just a note across the front. "For Sophie. Read when you're ready." I stared at it for hours, left it alone while I loaded the dishwasher, passed it as I made tea I never drank. The apartment was quiet save for the ticking of the living room clock and the occasional sound of Daniel shifting in our bed down the hall. Eventually, curiosity won. I peeled open the envelope with deliberate care, like whatever was inside might shatter if I moved too fast. There were two things. The first, a letter. 4 handwritten pages, written with hesitation and guilt, bleeding through every line. Linda wrote about secrets, about the man in the photo, David Foster. She said he and my mother had been inseparable. Once. She didn't call him my father, not outright, but the implication hung over every word like fog. You deserve the truth, even if Margot never found the courage to tell you. The second item was a photo. It was older than the one I'd found in the attic, slightly faded. A man, David, I now assumed, was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a soft blanket. His smile was small and stunned, the way men look when holding something impossibly fragile. Scrawled in block letters across the bottom, "My daughter, March 1994, my birth month, my birth year." I dropped the photo as if it burned. Everything in me screamed that this couldn't be real, that my mother wouldn't hide something like this, that Richard was my father. He had to be. But the photo didn't lie, and suddenly neither did Linda's cryptic words. The next morning, I cornered my mother in the hotel suite where we were getting ready. She was meticulously organizing makeup brushes, fussing over her reflection in the vanity mirror like she hadn't aged since the 90s. I held the photo in my hand, the letter still in my purse. "Who is David Foster?" Her hand paused mid-powder. "Where did you hear that name?" "Just answer the question." She turned, her smile tight. "He was a friend from college. I already told you." "Mom?" I stepped closer, holding out the photo. "This isn't just a friend." She took one look and visibly stiffened. "Why are you digging into this now, 2 days before your wedding?" "Because I think you've been lying to me. My whole life." Her tone changed instantly, like a switch had flipped. "Sophie, you're being paranoid. This is not the time to go chasing some fantasy. You have a wedding to focus on." "I need the truth. You're getting married. You're happy. Why do you want to blow that up over something that doesn't matter anymore?" I stared at her, stunned by how easily she dismissed it. Dismissed me. Like my identity was some trivial distraction from flower arrangements and seating charts. Later that night, I tried to talk to Richard. We were alone on the patio, a soft breeze shifting the string lights above us. I asked him if there was something I needed to know, something he'd never told me. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just said, "Your mother loves you. That's what matters." "That's not what I asked." He sighed. "You're about to marry a good man. Don't ruin that by digging up ghosts." Ghosts. The word stuck in my throat like ash. I looked at the man who'd raised me, who had cheered at my high school graduation, who taught me how to drive, and for the first time, I wondered if he'd been pretending all along. Something was unraveling, rapidly, quietly, and the people I loved most were doing everything they could to keep the thread from fully snapping. But it was too late for that, and I wasn't going to stop pulling. I found Linda outside the venue the next morning, sitting alone on a bench with a cigarette she never lit. Her gaze drifted toward the hills in the distance, like they might offer an escape. When she saw me approach, she didn't smile. She just patted the empty spot beside her. "You figured it out, didn't you?" she said softly. "I need to hear you say it." Linda sighed, the kind of sigh that's been sitting in a person's chest for years. "Your mother was 19 when she met David Foster. He was 22. Brilliant, intense, reckless in the way young men always think they're invincible. She loved him. God, she loved him. But he wasn't safe." Safe? He was working as a contractor in government data security, found something he wasn't supposed to. Instead of staying quiet, he tried to expose it. Your mom begged him to walk away from it. He wouldn't. So she left. She was scared and pregnant. Richard had just proposed. He knew the situation, knew the child wasn't his. And he married her anyway. Linda nodded. He said he loved her enough to raise you as his own, and for a while, I think it worked, until the guilt caught up with them. I let the silence settle between us, heavy and complicated. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because your mother wanted to forget it ever happened. And Richard, he probably thought protecting the lie was the same thing as protecting you. I looked at her then, really looked. And you? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, she said, voice cracking. So many times, but your mother would cut me off, and I didn't want to be the villain in your story. It was too late for that. The villain was already written. And now, so was the truth. I didn't go to the brunch that morning. I told Daniel I had a headache, which wasn't exactly a lie. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed David Foster plus whistleblower into the search bar. The results hit like a tidal wave. There were archived articles from 1994 and 95, stories about a young government IT consultant who had leaked internal memos exposing unethical data tracking by a federal agency. The case had gone national. There were Senate hearings, public outcry, and then silence. According to one article, David Foster had disappeared shortly after testifying, citing safety concerns. No charges were filed, but his name became radioactive. He was labeled a liability, a traitor by some, a hero by others. Another link took me to an old blog post from a conspiracy forum in 2008, claiming Foster was living under a new identity in Colorado, working as a systems analyst. No photo, just a single line that made my stomach flip. Reliable sources say he has a daughter, lives out of state, doesn't know. I stared at those words for a long time. He had stayed away, on purpose, to protect me? Or because he didn't care? I wasn't sure which answer hurt more. I dug deeper, combing through court transcripts, scanned copies of handwritten testimonies, even an old podcast episode that referenced his case as one of the unsolved ethical martyrdoms of the 90s. Then I found it. A recent article, just 6 months old, buried in a cybersecurity trade magazine. David Foster, now Daniel Roth, appointed as Chief Data Integrity Officer at a private firm in Boulder. There was a grainy photo attached. His hair was gray now, his face older, sharper, worn, but it was him. The same man from the photo in the envelope, the same eyes. I sat back in my chair, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted to get out. He was real, alive, not a ghost, not a myth. And for 29 years, no one had thought I deserved to know he existed. I had 3 days until the wedding, and I had just found my real father. The morning of the wedding, I woke up feeling like a passenger in someone else's life. My reflection in the mirror looked bridal enough. Soft curls pinned in place, makeup flawless, veil waiting patiently on the chair. But inside, I felt completely unanchored, like I was floating above the whole day, watching it unfold through a pane of glass I couldn't quite break. My mother was in her element, barking orders to the coordinator, smoothing tablecloths that didn't need smoothing, rearranging place cards for the 3rd time. She hadn't mentioned the photo, the letter, or the conversation we'd had in the suite. As far as she was concerned, none of it had ever happened. "Let's just get through today," she'd told me the night before, her voice brittle. "You'll thank me later." I wasn't so sure. Richard arrived in his rented tux just before the ceremony, eyes tired, smile hollow. When it came time to walk me down the aisle, he barely said a word. No cheesy dad joke, no whispered sentiment, just a stiff arm and silence. The ceremony blurred. I heard Daniel's vows. I even said mine. I think I smiled in the right places, but my heart felt split. Half of it standing there with him, the other still spiraling in questions no one seemed willing to answer. At the reception, the mood lightened. Friends danced, champagne flowed, people told stories about how Daniel and I were meant to be. For a few hours, I almost forgot about the photo tucked in my clutch. Then Linda took the microphone. "I'd like to say a few words," she said, slightly unsteady on her feet. "About Sophie, about truth, about the ways love sometimes means hiding things, and how that doesn't make them right." I felt my stomach drop. My mother stood quickly, smile frozen. Linda? But Linda kept going. Sophie has always had a way of shining light into places people would rather leave dark, even as a kid. You couldn't lie to her, not for long. My chest tightened as every eye turned to me. Then, almost mercifully, Linda raised her glass and smiled. To Sophie, a woman brave enough to face what most people would rather keep buried. Everyone clapped. Only I understood what she meant, and I wasn't sure I was brave, not yet. The test arrived in a slim white envelope, the kind that looked far too ordinary to hold something so monumental. I waited until Daniel left for the gym the next morning, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea, and stared at the sealed flap like it might open on its own. I'd mailed the sample in a week before the wedding, during one of those long, sleepless nights after finding the photo. No one knew. Not my mother, not Richard, not even Linda. I'd spit into the plastic tube with shaking hands and told myself it was just to put my mind at ease. It hadn't. I peeled open the envelope slowly, heart racing. The report was clear. Parentage probability, 0%. Richard wasn't my biological father. Somehow, seeing it in black and white didn't bring the closure I'd expected. It didn't answer the bigger question echoing through every memory of my childhood. If he wasn't my father, what was he? A placeholder? A participant in a lie? Or something more complicated than either? Daniel came home to find me still sitting at the table, the paper unfolded in front of me. He stopped when he saw my face. Is that... I nodded. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't have to. Instead, he knelt beside my chair, took my hand, and said, "Do you want to find him?" "I think I have to." "Then we'll do it. Together." That was Daniel. Steady, unshakable. The kind of person who didn't flinch in the face of emotional landmines. He didn't try to fix it, didn't tell me it didn't matter. He just stayed beside me, holding my hand like an anchor. That night, I opened my laptop again and searched for Daniel Roth, David Foster's new name. I reread the article, stared at his face. I wondered if he knew I existed. I wondered if he'd want to. There was only one way to find out. And after nearly 30 years of secrets, I was done waiting for permission to know the truth. I rewrote the letter 6 times before I finally sent it. The first draft was too formal, the second too emotional. By the 6th, I settled into something somewhere in the middle. Honest, measured, cautiously hopeful. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had found his name, that I believed we were connected, and that I wasn't looking for anything except the truth. I signed it simply, sincerely, Sophie Taylor, March 1995. I included a return address and a new email I'd created just for this. Something about contacting your biological father felt like it deserved its own inbox. And then I waited. Weeks passed. The wedding photos came in. Daniel framed one of us laughing beneath string lights, and I kept catching myself staring at it too long, trying to hold on to something steady while my past kept shifting beneath me. Then, 3.5 weeks after I sent the letter, a cream envelope appeared in my mailbox. Same neat handwriting. Same pause in my chest as I opened it. Dear Sophie, I've been waiting for this moment for 29 years. His words weren't poetic. They were careful, thoughtful, real. He told me how much he loved my mother once and how deeply he had believed in what he was doing, that the truth mattered, that his decision to testify had felt necessary until the day she gave him a choice. You can be a whistleblower or a father, not both. He said he'd always wondered what I looked like, if I had her eyes, if I liked books, if I laughed the way she used to. I never stopped being curious, I just stopped hoping. I read the letter twice, then a third time, slower. He left a phone number at the bottom. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet you, but only if you want that too. I sat there for a long time, letter pressed to my chest like it might ground me. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. I flew to Colorado alone. Daniel offered to come, but I needed space to breathe. to feel whatever this would be without worrying how anyone else might react to it. David, no, he had signed his email as David, not Daniel Roth, had suggested we meet in a quiet cafe just outside Boulder. He'd reserved a table in the back. I recognized him instantly. He stood when I walked in, nervous energy radiating from him like heat. "Sophie," he said, voice catching. I nodded. "Hi?" We didn't hug, not at first, just stood there, absorbing each other in real time. His hair was mostly gray, his face more lined than the photo suggested, but the eyes were the same. Mine, in a mirror I'd never looked into. We sat, talked. He told me about his work in data privacy, his quiet life. He never married, no kids. He said he never felt right starting something else, knowing I was out there. "I didn't want to replace something I never had the chance to know," he said quietly. We talked about books, movies, favorite foods. It felt strange and natural at the same time, like interviewing a stranger and slowly realizing he might have been a missing puzzle piece all along. Then, toward the end of our coffee, he slid a worn leather-bound journal across the table. "I started it the week you were born," he said. "One entry every birthday. I didn't know where else to put it all." My throat closed. He'd written to me. Every year, on paper, in ink. I took the journal with both hands, holding it like something sacred. "I don't expect anything," he said gently. "No label, no promises, I'm grateful you wanted to find me." I finally stood, walked around the table, and hugged him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after a lifetime of secrets, real felt like enough. I asked them to meet me at the house I grew up in. The living room hadn't changed much in the last decade. Same floral couch, same outdated curtains, same faint smell of lemon cleaner and lavender. Only this time, the silence between us felt cavernous. My mother sat rigid on the edge of the armchair, fingers clutched around her coffee mug like it might give her strength. Richard stood behind her, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed somewhere near the fireplace. I pulled out the photo, the letter, the DNA results. No preamble, no performance. "I know." My mother's face crumpled before I finished the sentence. She didn't deny it this time. She didn't have the energy. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. "You had a good life, a stable home. Why bring in chaos?" "Because it was my truth," I said, calm but firm, "and I had a right to it." Tears slid down her cheeks, slow and quiet. I was scared. David was involved in things I couldn't understand, dangerous things. I thought it would be better to pretend. Richard cleared his throat. "I wanted to tell you," he said softly, "more times than I can count, but every time I looked at you, I was afraid I'd lose the right to be your dad." I turned toward him, heart aching with something heavier than anger. "You were there for everything. My first bike, every school play. You are my dad, but you lied too." He nodded, eyes rimmed with red. "I know, and I'm sorry." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. But a piece of me fractured anyway, because betrayal doesn't always come like a storm. Sometimes it's the quiet erosion of trust that hurts the most. Healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments. Phone calls with David that stretched late into the night, sharing the journal entries he wrote each year, hearing about his regrets, his fears, his life lived in the margins of someone else's story. Sometimes we talked about everything, sometimes nothing, but it never felt forced. He never tried to claim space I wasn't ready to give. With Richard, things were harder, more complicated, but we kept trying. He started calling just to check in, invited me to lunch, brought Daniel a vintage record player just because. There were long silences, but also moments that reminded me of who he'd always been, the man who showed up even when he didn't know what to say. One afternoon, as we sipped coffee on his porch, I said, "You know I still love you, right?" He blinked hard, nodded. "I never stopped loving you, not once." My mom took longer. She apologized often, as if repetition could smooth over the jagged edges of her choices. But I didn't need words. I needed action. So when she suggested therapy, just to talk if you want, I agreed. Our first session was quiet, awkward. She cried. I didn't. We danced around years of silence like it might break if we touched it too directly. But we showed up, week after week, and that mattered. "I just wanted a normal life for you," she said one day, voice shaking. "There's no such thing," I replied, "but I deserved a truthful one." She nodded, tears sliding freely now. "I'm trying." I know. The truth had cracked us open, but from those fractures, something new was growing. Not perfect, but honest. And that, finally, was enough. 1 year later, I stood at the front of a sunlit conference room, a mic in one hand and a belly just beginning to show beneath my tailored navy dress. The women's leadership retreat had asked me to speak about identity and resilience in uncertain times. I almost said no. I wasn't sure I had the right words. Not yet. But something in me knew this moment mattered. So I told them the truth, not the polished version. Not the kind that fits neatly into a motivational quote. I talked about the photo, the letter, the lies that lived inside my childhood. I talked about how finding my real father shattered something I didn't even know was fragile, my sense of self, and how, slowly, carefully, I'd started rebuilding it. I spent most of my life believing a version of myself that wasn't real, I said to the room, full of strangers who suddenly felt closer than most of my extended family. But truth doesn't destroy identity. It reclaims it. It lets you start again, with your eyes wide open. There were nods, a few misty eyes, but more than that, there was stillness. The kind that comes when people recognize their own story, hiding inside someone else's. I talked about forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the kind that doesn't promise to forget, only to move forward. I spoke about the two men who raised me, one with presence, one from a distance, both imperfect, both trying in their own way. And I spoke about my mother, how the choices she made came from fear, not cruelty, and how I was learning to love her through the lens of understanding, not approval. When I finished, the applause felt secondary to the quiet rush of relief in my chest. I had spoken the whole truth, out loud, to people who didn't expect me to protect anyone's version but my own. Later that evening, I sat in the garden outside the retreat center, Daniel's arm around my shoulders, a slice of lemon cake in my lap. Richard arrived first, carrying a pink gift bag and looking proud in that subtle, awkward way that was uniquely his. David followed a few minutes later, gripping a well-wrapped box and smiling with eyes that still searched mine, like he couldn't believe he was finally here. They sat beside us. Different histories, different wounds, one shared future. We were blended, imperfect, and finally, honest. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, it was enough. It was everything.